Taking a live look at the U.S. Capitol tonight, we are just 25 minutes away from what is expected to be a short but partial government shutdown. Thanks for joining us for this special report. I'm WUSA 9 anchor Larry Miller reporting from Washington, D.C. And over the next hour, we are going to break down how we got here, what's next, and what lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are demanding moving forward. Let's get up to speed, though, on where we stand with those ongoing negotiations. WUSA 9's Randy Hildreth joining us right now with the latest on the shutdown, which will begin at midnight, but only is expected to last just to the weekend when the House reconvenes on Monday, and they will, in fact, vote again. Randy?
Yeah, good evening to you, Larry. That Senate vote wrapped up just before 7 p.m. Eastern tonight. The final vote, 71-29 to pass the funding package, hours ahead of the deadline. But I want to be clear to you tonight, this is just the first hurdle. After tonight's vote, the House still needs to vote on the funding package. As you mentioned, that won't happen until Monday, so there will still be a partial shutdown until we can check that box. I want to break down what was on the table. Senators voted on 5 bills to fund multiple agencies through September. For example, the Labor Department, the Transportation Department. The compromise in this, though, was the funding for DHS. That agency is only funded for 2 weeks at its current level. Democrats said they want to discuss immigration enforcement before they would commit to more. The debate over funding DHS erupted after a second person was killed in a shooting involving ICE agents in Minneapolis. So you mentioned, what are Democrats demanding? I want to break that down. They are demanding an end to roving ICE patrols, require ICE to wear body cameras. They want rules around what kind of warrants immigration officers can use to enter homes. They also want to ban agents from covering their faces. Here is the latest reaction to tonight's vote.
The American people are crying out for change. They see what's happening on our streets.
Hold the people accountable in ICE who may have broken the law, but stand up for those in the field trying to protect America.
Of the partial shutdown could be minimal. We're hearing the House could vote by 6:30 Monday, plus the shutdown is happening as we're headed into the weekend. Back to you.
All right, Randy, certainly appreciate the update, but we know that the fight is certainly far from over. We'll see you momentarily. Thank you very much. Let's bring in our panel. Sherlyn Harley-Laban, she's a former senior counsel for the Senate Judiciary Committee, and Dominic Thompson, executive director of the Fairfax County Democratic Committee. Thank you both for being here. We certainly appreciate it. I mean, obviously we're both from Washington, all from Washington here, so we certainly know that the drama that's going on. These negotiations sort of set up sort of the interesting talks that will take place on Monday, at least in the House, as it really specifically to that funding for DHS. It does seem, though, that this argument that we're seeing is a bit different. One, because it really is the public opposition to what they've seen in Minneapolis and through other parts of the country that's really leading the charge for people to think about this a bit differently and a bit more critically. Where do you stand on this?
So, I mean, obviously, a good portion of DHS has already been funded. Like $76 billion is already funded for the next 5 years. So this part of what we're talking about coming up for the next weekend is another sort of section, right? It's started a whole other conversation to open the door about the current events that are happening. So I'm not sure we've ever seen something like this happen before, but it is an interesting time, and it's also interesting to see what will happen in the House on Monday. You know, it all remains to be seen. But the important point is that, you know, a good portion, this is just a limited shutdown. I think that you know, Americans need to understand that it's a limited shutdown. Only a certain number of agencies will be impacted. DOD, HHS, Transportation, HUD. So it's not like the full-on shutdown that we saw in October that lasted for 43 days.
Right, so we're not going to see hundreds of thousands of people furloughed. And
we're not going to see like over 600,000 federal employees, which were furloughed during the shutdown earlier.
Right, so we won't see that, but there still will be impacts nonetheless.
Correct, especially because we're talking about DOD. And DOD affects so many federal government contractors who now have to think about the work that's interrupted. They have to figure out what to do with their employees. They have to communicate with their contracting officers. So there still is that's going on because, of course, DOD is the largest federal agency with the largest budget.
And what sort of impact from the work that you've done do shutdowns, either short or small, have on the contracting workforce?
Correct.
Because the work that they do really is critical to our national security.
Absolutely. So for the contractors that are engaged in mission critical work, so that tends to be contractors working in the cleared space, right? Their work should most likely continue, okay? Because it's mission critical. But other contractors, right, that are just doing other DOD work, this may impact them. And so it's very important for them to communicate with their contracting officers because, again, sort of every program within agencies vary, right? And so that's why it's really important for contractors to communicate with their contracting officers, figure out what that means for their own company and their own employees and what can and cannot be done. And also, most importantly, they also need to keep track of the expenses that they're incurring because some of those can be reimbursable.
You know, considering your background, I'm curious for you, people on Capitol Hill have certainly used the shutdown as a tactic, a negotiation tactic when it comes to legislation. Would you like to see it go away in this regard?
I would, because I think that, you know, Americans and people all over the world are impacted by these shutdowns. And so, I mean, the business of the government is $1 trillion industry, government contracting. So when you have these shutdowns, the impact is just, it's worldwide. And I think people need to understand that.
Well, Dominic, when we think about what's been transpiring in Minneapolis, we know that the events that have taken place there really have shaped the conversation that we're seeing here in Washington. Based on what you've been talking about with your sources and your contacts here on Capitol Hill, I'm curious for you, do Democrats feel like the tide is turning as it relates to the public opposition to what they've been seeing in terms of ICE and its enforcement of immigration policy nationwide?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you look at what's happening in Minnesota currently, you know, and it's happening throughout the nation, but there's such a focus on Minnesota at the moment. You know, you've had 2 American citizens now who have been, you know, killed by federal ICE enforcement officers. Right now, the agency looks like a rogue agency. It looks out of control. It looks like it's in chaos. And so, you know, a lot of Democrats on Capitol Hill are feeling the pressure to say, are we going to fund an agency, you know, that's rogue, unaccountable, and that, you know, now members of Congress are even having difficulty getting into ICE facilities, which they're supposed to be able to enter at any moment, right? So, you know, it's really a question with this government shutdown, and as we get into a partial shutdown over the weekend, but then also probably another protracted one later on, it's really a question of, are we as a government going to vote to actually fund an agency that doesn't seem to be accountable to our democracy?
And it does appear as if some Republicans are at least open to a measure of reforms.
Absolutely. And I think it's important that, you know, we don't really know what went on there because I think that, I mean, we know a gun went off, and when those things happen, it's always very, you know, it devolves into a very bad situation. I think that DHS Inspector General's office is going to conduct an investigation, as they should. That is their role to do that. I also think there's some questions about the chain of custody regarding the gun that went off, and I think we need to understand that. There's body cam footage that we still need to investigate. So, like so many Americans, we'd like to know what exactly happened there.
Yeah, and we want the full picture.
Yeah, we want the full picture.
If I can add on to that, though, you know, I think that a large part of the reason why DH funding, you know, is being looked at so heavily right now, right, is you really can't trust this administration and their accounts of events. Right? Whenever they go out and call every person who's being killed by ICE a domestic terrorist and saying that, you know, they were actively working to harm ICE agents, right? And we can see from video footage that that's not true. You know, that the line coming from the administration isn't true. I don't think most Americans feel like there will be a fair process to actually investigate and get to the bottom and make sure that there's justice in a case like this, especially with Alex Peretti. So, I mean, you know, a really large part of the reason why ICE funding is going to be so contentious over the next few weeks because they have 2 weeks to make a deal for a portion, as you were saying, a portion of that ICE funding. You have to realize that part of it is Americans right now don't really trust the government, in the Trump administration when they say they're going to do something in regards to ICE.
Well, that's why I think it's really important for the Inspector General to do a thorough investigation, to look at that body cam footage, because that is the role of the Inspector Generals at these agencies. Right. And so they're independent, which is a very good thing. They're independent, and they need to do a thorough investigation, because we need to understand what happened.
And certainly the American people deserve answers,
Absolutely.
regardless of how this all comes down in the end. I want to get to Republican Andy Harris, representing Maryland's 1st Congressional District. I had the opportunity to speak with him a few hours ago. Here's what he had to say.
Congressman, I want to get your thoughts today on the passage of that bill that took place in the Senate this evening. How are you feeling about it? Do you feel that there could be some compromise eventually with Democrats and Republicans as it relates specifically to DHS funding?
Well, I hope there is a compromise at some point, because we've got FEMA in the DHS bill, we've got TSA in the DHS bill, and obviously, there are a lot of important things the Department of Homeland Security does. I wish the Senate had just agreed to the bill, and we wouldn't again be facing another cliff in a couple of weeks. But hopefully, the president can negotiate something with the Democrats and the Republicans to get us all on board, so we fund the Department of Homeland Security before the February 13th deadline.
Democrats are pushing for reforms that they say are necessary, kind of citing what happened in Minneapolis, saying that ICE has been too aggressive. How do you feel about it?
Well, ICE has been active in all 50 states, and really the only place where the pushback has been is in Minneapolis, where, of course, the governor and the mayor have basically condoned the anti-ICE activity. So in the other states where, again, the local officials have not done the same thing, there hasn't been a problem. So you wouldn't want to change it nationwide for what's going on in Minneapolis. Now, that being said, we've agreed to body cameras being worn by the ICE agents. I personally feel that we should have independent investigations when we have a shooting, like we do with any law enforcement agency. But again, the need to get a judicial warrant goes way beyond what has been done for decades with regards to what ICE does and what ICE can do. Because again, they're going after people who are not U.S. citizens, and they're not afforded the same rights of judicial warrant as a U.S. citizen is.
The majority of U.S. Americans feel that ICE may be a bit too aggressive in the way in which it's approaching its enforcement. Do you feel that there might be an opportunity for some compromise here, at least specifically as it relates to the tactics that ICE uses to enforce immigration laws?
Well, I think appointing Tom Homan to get in charge of this, I think was a very good move by the president. Tom Homan has worked for both administrations, Democrat and Republican administrations, been appointed by President Biden, of course, to his last job. So the bottom line is that Tom Homan is the right person to get this done right, and I think he's going to find that balance between doing what the American people want is actually to make sure that illegal aliens, especially the ones who commit crimes, are deported, and they're deported promptly. And again, the concerns, like I mentioned, that we have independent investigations, that we use body cameras, we do the things we normally do when law enforcement is involved. But again, ICE agents are law enforcement agents; they should be respected. These crowds in Minneapolis that don't respect law enforcement, and where local law enforcement has been instructed basically not to help. That just shouldn't go on. That's not the way we do things in America. This is a law and order country, and again, that's what we should be doing around the United States. And again, in 49 out of the 50 states, we don't have the problem. It's really just in Minneapolis.
All right, Congressman, anything else that you want to add that I didn't ask you?
Well, again, it's too bad that the government's going to be, going to have a partial shutdown for 3 days. Again, the Senate probably should have done this earlier. Had the Senate done this earlier in the week, we might have been able to get it called back. But now, of course, with the winter storm approaching, it makes it very difficult to get members back in Washington before Monday. So hopefully we deal with this Monday night.
Do you anticipate any issues come Monday night?
There might be, even though Chuck Schumer negotiated this bill, just barely half of the Democrat senators voted for his deal. So I hope that we have a similar number of Democrats supporting it in the House, because if we don't, it's going to be a heavy lift in the House.
course, we will see how it all shakes out in Washington. We know there will be plenty of action there, no doubt. Congressman, good to see you as always. Thank you so much, sir, for your time. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Well, we also spoke with Maryland Congressman Glenn Ivy, and we talked about the shutdown and why he says that Democrats feel that DHS reforms cannot go unignored.
We need to take steps to make sure that ICE gets reined in, the Border Patrol get reined in. I think they need to be pulled out of the cities, certainly in the volume that they have there. You know, like a year ago, you had about 100 ICE officers in Minneapolis. Now you have 3,000. That's like 6 times more than the number of police officers that they have in the city combined. So, you know, they've overdone it. They've been breaking the law. They've been breaking into people's houses without warrants and the like. It's time for them to be reined in. And I think it's also time for Noam to go. She's done a terrible job. She's in over her head. And the chain of command at Homeland Security is broken, I think in part due to her mismanagement of the agency. So they need to get a complete overhaul over there, and they need to get moving on that sooner rather than later. And that's why we're trying to force this issue on the Trump administration.
Is this the best means of doing this, though? Is there another means that wouldn't have an impact on people's livelihoods that would be a way in which to address this and also push through your concerns and hopefully get a resolution to them?
Sure, we could have Republicans agree that, for example, deportation of citizens is illegal and should not be done. Detaining U.S. citizens by ICE, that shouldn't be happening either. Those are the types of things we've been asking for, and the Republicans have refused to agree to those. Now, I do see some steps in the right direction. You've had Republicans in the House and Senate agree that there are problems with the shooting, certainly with Mr. Preddy, and agreeing to have some hearings. There's the silence is deafening about Republican defense of Secretary Noam. I think they all recognize what a bad job she's doing and that ICE is off course for sure and needs a major course correction, to say the least. So I think we're moving in the right direction, and hopefully we'll get there sooner rather than later.
How far are Democrats willing to go in order to see this through? I mean, last shutdown was 43 days, with eventually Democrats joining Republicans and getting that continuing resolution passed. How far are Democrats willing to go this time?
Well, it's hard to say at this point, but I think it's everybody. There's a growing concern, certainly within the Democratic Party, but I think as well as Republicans, and even the Trump White House is recognizing that ICE is, is out of control. I mean, they're killing people. They have people dying in custody. They're seizing a 5-year-old and holding him in detention. Shooting canisters of tear gas and the like at protesters who were just exercising their First Amendment rights. He said he was going to focus on the worst of the worst, rapists, killers, and the like, but that's clearly not what they're doing. They're doing racial profiling and casting a broad net. And I think the Wall Street Journal just pointed out that only 5% of the ICE arrests have included people who have violent criminal records. So, they're off track. The focus is wrong. I know Trump is one of those guys that he can't admit that he's made a mistake, but something's going to have to give here, because people can't keep dying and being arrested at the rates that they have been.
Let's bring in Dr. Karen Holt, professor of political science at Virginia Tech University. Dr. Holt, it seems like we're having sort of a broader conversation, not just about an agency, but just also about the general treatment of individuals generally. Give us your assessment in terms of what this debate really represents and where are we headed?
All very good and all very difficult questions, to be sure. It seems to me, I actually don't agree with the congressman who said this is a Minneapolis only problem. I think it's a little bit broader than that, but I think there is real concern among members of the citizenry across the United States about how individuals are being treated by government authorities at all sorts of levels. But it's certainly come to a flashpoint in terms of the operation of DHS personnel, not just ICE, but also Border Patrol and some of the others. And that kind of effort makes people wonder about, do I need to continually look over my shoulders as to what's going to happen to me or people I care about that live in my neighborhood or whom I teach in the classroom? And what we've seen with regard to racial profiling, picking out people based not so much on what their records suggest they may have done or their lack or not having documentation on them, but basically saying we really need to expand this further and start saying about how are we treating individuals as human beings and as residents of a representative democracy. And that kind of discussion is difficult to have because people draw all kinds of lines ideologically, in partisan terms, in religious terms as well. All of those things, I think, are at issue here with regards that have come to a head, of course, with the situation that's happened most recently in Minneapolis.
Dr. Holt, Fox News polling showing that 59% of voters say that ICE is too aggressive. That's up 10% from July. An Economist YouGov poll also showing that 55% of Americans say that they have very little confidence in ICE. You talk with the administration, they say that this level of enforcement is necessary. They are making good on a campaign promise, keeping Americans safe. How do you square that? I mean, it seems like we have sort of very polar opposites here as it relates specifically to this argument. The administration saying that this level of enforcement is necessary, and many Americans who say that it's a little too much.
I'm not sure there's an argument there to be squared, quite frankly, although they do seem to come out in different kinds of ways. I think where you started with those poll results was with what the promises were that people heard during the campaign. I think at least some people responding to polls are saying that's not quite what we thought the campaign was talking about in terms of going after the worst of the worst and making sure that people that were not in the country legally could be identified, and under the circumstances, if they did not meet certain kinds of refugee requirements, for example, or didn't have other protected status, would be asked to leave the country quite promptly in a fair and manner in terms of following due process of all sorts of things. So I think that's the disconnect between what people thought they were hearing from the presidential candidates and what they're seeing now on the ground. I think that's part of it. The other thing that is perhaps worth paying attention to is that, at least from some of the polling I have seen, is that there is a divide not only between people who call themselves Republicans, Democrats, and Independents, but vast divides between people based on age cohorts. And especially younger respondents to polls are saying this is nowhere near what our values are or what we would like to see happening in the United States, even if they indeed did vote for Mr. Trump or are strong supporters of more conservative activities. So I think we've got all kinds of differences here in terms of how people are perceiving what's going on, what the information is telling them, and where they receive their information, and the extent to which that information is credible and supported by additional evidence. So we have all of these difficult things going on as we're trying to make sense of what to do in a very uncertain, polarized, and quite frankly, frightening situation for a whole range of people.
Well, certainly we are in some interesting times, but historically we always seem to make it through. Dr. Karen Holt, Professor of Political Science at Virginia Tech University. Good to see you. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you.
Of course, thank you.
Maryland Senator Angela Alsobrooks' statement from her office earlier today saying about her vote that tonight I voted no on a package of bills that included a continuing resolution to add additional funding to the Department of Homeland Security. I have made it abundantly clear that we cannot send another penny to ICE without serious reforms. Masked men are killing Americans in our streets and terrorizing our communities. The legislation tonight included no reforms, so I voted no. I had an opportunity to catch up with the senator on Capitol Hill. Take a listen. I want to know, how far are Democrats willing to go when it relates specifically to funding for DHS and trying to get the reforms that you are advocating for?
Well, the sentiment inside our caucus, I have to tell you, is that we all recognize that our country is in a moral crisis right now. There's a crisis of affordability, but there's also an accountability crisis. And the high sentiment is that we are determined to have reforms and to have accountability. And we will not support anything that does not include real reforms within DHS and real accountability. We are looking at an agency now that is operating without even the basic national standards that we see our police officers held to. The ones that require body cameras, that we should have transparency and full investigations, that we can stop these roving efforts with DHS, ICE roving around our communities without a judicial warrant. We want their masks to come off. We want to be able to identify them. So these are some real reforms that we're interested in making sure that we have that and to have accountability. And that's going to be really important.
We're coming off of a 43-day shutdown that affected many constituents in the state of Maryland, as Maryland has a lot of federal workers. Are you willing to go another 43 days in the government shutdown to see this through?
None of us have ever wanted a shutdown. The Democrats didn't want the previous one that was, by the way, precipitated by Republicans who are in control of everything. It's important to make the point that it is intellectually dishonest to say that when the Republicans control the Senate, the House, and the White House, that any shutdown is at the feet of the Democratic Party. We expect our colleagues on the other side of the aisle to have a conscience, and I know that many of them are seeing this, and we're hearing people begin to come out and talk about it. But I think it has to be the case that our Republican colleagues also say enough is enough. We all have a responsibility here in the Senate to hold accountable an administration that is terrorizing and killing Americans on the streets of America. And when our Republican colleagues stand up and do that, I think that we're going to be in a much better space, and I think the American people are demanding it, and they should.
What are the negotiations going on right now? I mean, do you feel like there's an opportunity for both Republicans and Democrats to potentially get a deal done before the deadline?
Well, the negotiations are about reform and accountability, saying that we will no longer put another penny into an agency that is terrorizing Americans without these reforms that we're talking about, that again, that they be brought up to a basic standard and that they be held accountable. That's what we're looking for.
Does it also include the removal of Kristi Noem as well?
Oh, absolutely. You know, a person who has overseen an agency that has so far cost at least 2 American lives. Kristi Noem must go. She should be fired forthwith. Any of us would be if we oversaw an agency that saw the killing of 2 in cold-blooded fashion Americans on our streets. She absolutely should be removed.
There are some that say that this isn't the best means of trying to get the changes with DHS, that there's another way in which this could be resolved, that it doesn't take this round of negotiations. To that, you say what?
With 2 people who have died, I don't think there's a single person who believes that those lives aren't worth us making some serious changes to ensure that this is not that this doesn't happen again. This is all that we are seeing is something that is taking our country. We're in a race to the bottom. We have no peace in our country. This is the same president who said he wants a Nobel Peace Prize, and we have no peace in America. So how much is too much? I don't believe there's any such thing as too much at a moment like this. We cannot tolerate this for another moment.
Are there Republicans that feel the same way you do?
I believe there are. You know, you've heard some of my colleagues who are beginning to come out and speak. I saw Senator Tillis and some others who have joined him who agree that we have a moral obligation to make sure that we are addressing what we have seen. The goons that are running around our country with a mask on their face killing Americans, I think that the temperature should be brought way down, and that, again, we need some reforms and some serious accountability.
12:03 straight up on the east, 9:03 on the west. You're taking a live look at the U.S. Capitol now, where the government is in a partial government shutdown. Our coverage continues. I'm WSN9 anchor Larry Miller reporting live from Washington, D.C. The Senate passed a funding deal, but because the House of Representatives is not scheduled to return to D.C. until Monday, well, the federal government is partially shut down, at least through the weekend. Let's go back to the newsroom. Randy Hildreth getting us up to speed with the latest. Randy, we've talked about a lot over the last 30 minutes. The negotiations are ongoing, and hopefully Monday we will see a resolution to this, at least in part.
Yeah, that is something that we are closely monitoring. I do want to do a quick reset for those who are watching, just to give you context of how we got to this point and how we continue to look forward. So the final vote for that funding measure, 71-29 to pass that funding package. We are continuing to get new reaction. Virginia Senator Mark Warner voted in favor of the funding measure, with Warner writing on X, and you can take a look at it here. This is a big moment. We force the White House to come to the table and separate DHS funding so we can negotiate reforms at ICE. Raising your voice works. Now let's negotiate real change at ICE. So this is some of the reaction that is coming in. I want to show you also a post on X from Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen. He voted against the funding measure. He wrote here, "My position has been clear and is unchanged. I will not vote for one more dime to fund Trump's lawless DHS. I voted no." So I want to break down what was on the table. So senators voted on 5 bills to fund multiple agencies through September. For example, the Department of Defense, the Labor Department, the Transportation Department. Now, the compromise in this was with funding for DHS. That agency is only funded for 2 weeks at its current level. Democrats say they want to discuss immigration enforcement before they would continue and commit to moving forward. Now, the debate over funding DHS erupted after 2 people were killed in a shooting involving ICE agents in Minneapolis. I want to get to you to the latest reaction after tonight's vote.
The American people are crying out for change. They see what's happening on our streets.
Hold the people accountable in ICE who may have broken the law, but stand up for those in the field trying to protect America.
Impacts of the partial shutdown could be minimal. We're hearing the House could vote by 6:30 Monday, plus the shutdown is happening as we are going into the weekend. I'll send it back to you, Larry.
All right, Randy. Thank you so much. Yeah, again, that partial government shutdown now in effect, 5 minutes after midnight. But we expect things to progress on Monday. We will see, as we heard from many members of Congress that you saw in our interviews there. I want to go back to our panel right now because they're a little fired up based on what you guys have been listening to. You guys got to hear a lot, from members of Congress. Are you concerned, or how do you feel about the job that they may be doing or may not be doing as it relates specifically to this issue and others?
So, I mean, ICE has already been funded $76 billion for the next 4 years. Yeah. So, I mean, I think a good way to find out what ICE is doing is, you know, we've got this great checks and balances in our country, right? And as a former House and Senate lawyer, we have oversight hearings. If you really want to drill down and find out what exactly ICE is doing, have oversight hearings. But to use this, you know, constant shutdowns, which we've had far too many in modern history, to think that you're going to get information or get a particular agency to act a certain way, I just don't think it's fair to the American people. I think you've passed. You know, you've passed this budget, the agency is going to be funded. Why do we keep doing these shutdowns? Why don't you get to the business of the American people and have oversight hearings? It's completely within their purview. And have these hearings and find out exactly what ICE and other law enforcement agencies are doing.
So some would call this a performance.
Yeah, I mean, it's a perfectly reasonable thing. It's within their purview. Why aren't they doing that?
Dominic, why aren't they doing it?
You know, Larry, first of all, I was going to say, it feels like I'm having deja vu. Another government shutdown 3 months later. Yeah. But I mean, it's not just an issue of oversight, right? I think that Congress has been abdicating a lot of its duties this term, especially this term, you know, in terms of oversight. But there are some real structural reforms that need to happen, right? Like, we don't need hearings to know that, like, ICE agents are, you know, going into communities masked, right? And trying to hide their identity. You know, we don't need testimonies to understand that they're not using body cam footage nearly as much as what they could be using, right? And so, you know, we don't need testimonies to know that they're shooting American citizens, you know, all, you know, in Minneapolis and throughout the country. We don't need more hearings to determine those things. We need reforms. And so, you know, Democrats are the party right now. They're actually trying to reform the system. They're trying to, you know, make sure that we're not targeting American citizens with ICE, which ICE really shouldn't be targeting American citizens within their purview that they have from Congress in the first place. So, I mean, no, this shutdown is not just about getting answers to some questions, which I agree needs to happen. It is about targeted reforms because this agency is out of control, and most Americans, you know, to your point earlier, 59% of Americans would agree that it's out of order right now.
But how are you going to get the reforms? This is the process by which you're going to get reforms, right? How do we define reforms? You need to pass rules, you need to pass laws. That is Congress's responsibility. I'm not in Congress. None of us here on this panel is. So I don't know how we think we're going to fix ICE if you don't go through a process of following the rules and reforming the rules. You have to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, this is what Congress's job is.
You know, it's interesting. You brought up a point about the reforms. You know, when you talk about Republicans, they say, listen, we need reforms too. We need to make sure that our law enforcement is safe when they're on the streets.
Yeah.
We need to make sure that our law enforcement officers are protected and able to do their jobs effectively and efficiently. And that also means too that we can't have a public that may be attacking them, infringing on their rights in some way. What do you say to that? Because there is a larger argument from Democrats, at least on the other side of this, but very little has been said about the way in which law enforcement is out there protecting the American public each and every day, and the responsibilities that they have in enforcing the rule of law.
Well, Larry, I'll tell you, I'm a good Lutheran. I don't believe in violence at all across the board. But the issue right now is, where is the focus at? Because not a single ICE officer has died in Minneapolis, right? American citizens have died.
Does it take someone to die in order for there to be reasonable reform?
No, I think that there is room for reasonable reform, right? And I do believe that if you're serving our country and you're upholding our Constitution, that you should be safe and executing those duties, right? However, the reason why Democrats are asking for reform right now is because American citizens are the ones being shot and killed at the moment. And so you can talk about reform and also making sure that, you know, individuals serving our nation are safe, but there is a real crisis right now. You know, every few days, a new American is being shot and killed in our country, especially by an agency that is not supposed to be interacting with citizens of our nation. And so, you know, when we're talking about reforms, you have to fix the urgent issues, right? And, you know, I will tell you, I'm not going to be hypocritical about this. If ICE agents were being, you know, harmed in the line of duty every day in Minneapolis, I would also say you need to have reforms to ensure that they can carry out their duties in a safe and effective manner. But right now, the focus is on American citizens because they're the ones who are being shot at the moment.
So I want to talk about law enforcement for a minute. So this is something I learned first year of law school. There are two sort of bodies of people who can take away your life legally, a judge and law enforcement. And so, you know, we know that the jobs of law enforcement at all levels, federal, state, and local, it's complicated. I mean, law enforcement are dealing with, you know, every day on the street. They are dealing with mentally ill people. They're dealing with criminals. I mean, in the moment, these law enforcement individuals have to make such calculated risks that unless you are in that situation, I think it's really hard to judge what these people have to do every day. It is not an easy job. It's not like we've got people signing up to be, you know, to be law enforcement at all levels. So you know, again, I want to understand what happened, but I just think these jobs are not easy. And to your point, we need people to follow the law, because this is what the job of law enforcement is to enforce the law. And so we need citizens to follow the law. Because then if we don't have that on either side, we have utter chaos.
Well, I will say, I've not heard of the law that Alex Preddy broke that decided that his life should be ended, right? And I think that you are right. You know, I know plenty of people who work in law enforcement, right? And I work with them in my daily life. And, you know, I do believe in having proper safety and making sure that people have proper training so they know how to de-escalate situations to make sure that everyone is safe in that situation. But right now, it's hard to defend what ICE is doing because they're not de-escalating, right? And both of the, you know, killings of Renee Good and Alex Preddy that we've seen, that could have been handled so much better. Those people should still be alive. And I think that you really need to ask, how do we reform ICE in a productive way that aligns with the mission that they're trying to achieve? You know, how do we make sure that we're getting, you know, any violent criminals who are here illegally out of the country, right? But American citizens should not be dying in the process, especially when this is all just a showman tactic from Donald Trump, because he doesn't know how to do solutions that aren't showman tactics.
But that's part of the problem. I don't think we actually know what happened.
Because we haven't had an investigation that's been
we
completed
don't
at
know
this
what
point.
happened.
Yes.
We know a gun went off. I mean, but what does that mean? We just don't know. I wasn't there.
I don't know. Those recordings, you could maybe make the argument with Renee Good killing because the footage is, from one specific angle, right? With the Alex Preddy case, we have footage from all sides at different angles. And
I'm not trusting the footage. I think we need to. I mean,
I feel like
I've seen media reports. I've seen the footage. I'm like, okay, it doesn't look good, but I'd still like to know.
Right. Which is the point of an investigation, right?
I mean,
we take all of those things into consideration to come down with a final determination as to what exactly happened in the series and the events in which it did occur.
Right. I mean, it's not good. I mean, it looks terrible, but I think we still need to know a little bit. We need to know a lot more.
Americans don't have faith in, have faith that this government is going to properly investigate in a fair and impartial way, right? And when it comes, I know you brought up independent investigators earlier, but the issue is this administration doesn't believe in independence. You look at what they're doing with the Fed, you look at how they're interacting with tariffs and things of that nature. You just really, it's hard for Americans to actually believe what's coming out of this administration.
But you know what? This is the system we have. Is someone going to recreate something else? This is what we've got. We've got an IG, an independent independent body within DHS whose job is to investigate this. And they have to do their job.
Yeah.
This is all we've got, folks. Are we going to make up something else?
Well, that's why Democrats are fighting for reform right now.
Well, I think both sides are fighting for reform. I think there are plenty of Republicans who also would like to get to the bottom of this. I can't give it all to the Democrats.
Yeah,
I mean,
for sure.
Some Republicans.
And I think you've heard from some in the House and the Senate who all said that this requires.
They're both alarmed. Both sides are alarmed.
Thorough investigation.
Yes, absolutely.
That is comprehensive. I want to bring in Dr. Andra Gillespie, Associate Professor of Political Science and Director of the James Weldon Johnson Institute at Emory University. Dr. Gillespie, you've got to hear a lot over the past 45 minutes. I want to sort of get your assessment in terms of where the conversation is nationally as it relates specifically to ICE, and really how these negotiations that have been taking place on Capitol Hill really demonstrates sort of the conversation that's taking place amongst our legislators and our leaders about maybe what is appropriate and what is not appropriate as it relates specifically to law enforcement.
Thank you. Well, as Dr. Holtz has already mentioned, the national climate seems like it opposes much of what the Trump administration is doing with regarding ICE enforcement. So a majority of respondents in recent public opinion surveys have indicated that they disapprove of how ICE is handling its business, and that they are saying, depending on how you word the question, that ICE has gone too far in its enforcement capability. So this doesn't take away from, the approval that some have given to the Trump administration for closing the southern border, but they're looking at this ICE enforcement in a very, very different light. And that's what Senate Democrats were considering when they were taking their stand this week. I'm going to disagree with some things that I've heard here. I think that what you see Senate Democrats trying to do here is actually a very important part of checks and balances, right? Not only is oversight an important part of checks and balances, it's also the idea that you bring them in for hearings to hold people accountable, but you're doing so because Congress holds the power of the purse. And so if Congress does not like how the executive branch is carrying out and implementing and enforcing the laws that they pass, they have the right to withhold funding for it. And that's the argument that Senate Democrats are making here. We're going to withhold additional ICE funding beyond what's already been appropriated in the big, beautiful bill, which includes things that are urgent and necessary for this coming fiscal year, like FEMA, for instance, and even some expanded ICE operations, until ICE indicates that it is going to do what Congress wants it to do and not necessarily what President Trump and others in the White House want them to do in carrying out and implementing the laws as they intended for it. And what they're saying is that they're looking for a consensus in Congress that the voice is not depriving people of their Fourth and Fifth Amendment rights, which I should point out actually apply to anybody in the United States, not just people who have citizenship, but also so that you're also making sure that you're not doing things like killing people in the streets. So that's why they're holding back from this right now. And I think that this is actually an important opportunity for at least Senate Democrats to be holding up the banner with some Republicans, if they choose to go along with this, to say that it's time for Congress to step up and actually hold the executive branch accountable and exert true checks and balances.
Well, Dr. Gillespie, certainly we've seen Republicans demonstrate an openness to where Democrats are on this particular issue. And I think based on what we've seen in the last year, I think 2025 has shown us a lot, that it was no doubt rather contentious. This, however, feels a lot different in terms of how this is being approached by both Republicans and Democrats. Does that point to any sort of change that we're seeing right now in the political landscape, especially as we think about the midterms this year?
Well, I mean, I think we are still in an era of hyper polarization, so I expect that there's still going to be a lot of polarization. It's going to be really interesting to see how the debate folds over the next 2 weeks as they deal with the stopgap legislation specifically for DHS. So Democrats have made their demands. They seem to be very straightforward. And for them, I don't think that there's much room for compromise in terms of giving up one of their demands. I think the question is, what might they concede in other ways in order to, get some buy-in from some of their Republican colleagues. When I look at the list of people who voted against the stopgap, knowing some of their ideological priors, I will have to wait to confirm, like through their press releases, why they took particular stances. I suspect that some of those Republicans did so because they just opposed the stopgap in principle and they wanted sort of a full, clean bill to go forward. So I think the question is, what are the remaining Republican moderates willing to do along with Senate Democrats to ensure that guardrails are put into place to try to put checks and to try to require, that DHS and that ICE in particular actually respect people's civil liberties and civil rights. And what kind of compromises will be made with them. So, for instance, like you're looking at Senator Lindsey Graham. Senator Lindsey Graham, is making demands that that there be something to try to stop cities and states from having some type of sanctuary status. So, I think we'll see if there are any compromises made on that. But I would be very surprised to see Democrats compromising on their demands that ICE agents stop wearing masks, that they be perfectly identified at all times, and also that they stop walking around in unmarked cars and doing other things that people have found very troubling and very problematic from a safety standpoint, but then also from a civil liberties standpoint.
Dr. Andra Gillespie, thank you so much for your time, and good morning to you, friend. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a good day, okay? John Hatton, Staff Vice President for Policy and Programs at the National Active and Retired Federal Employees Association. He and I spoke, and we talked about what the impact of either a short or a long-term shutdown will have on the federal workforce. Take a listen.
And to your knowledge, have federal employees been told to prepare for a shutdown?
Not yet, because we haven't gotten there yet, and it looks like things are trending in the right direction. But I would expect that to happen maybe sometime tomorrow.
With that, let's go to Randy Hildreth back in the newsroom for us. Randy, a lot for us to process as we get ready for Monday, and we will see what the negotiations will look like in the House. But if they were anything like what we saw in the Senate, we know that this debate is far from over.
Right. And some people may be asking themselves, OK, what is next? We know we have to get to Monday. I want to break down the immediate next steps. One, we know that we are in a partial government shutdown. The Senate leaders voted before 7 p.m. last night Eastern time on funding some government agencies like Transportation Department, the Labor Department. And then we talk about what is next. The House will vote on this measure on Monday, but things are still not squared away with long-term funding for DHS. That agency only funded for 2 weeks at its current level. Democrats said they want to discuss immigration enforcement before they would commit to more. And so I want to bring up some new reaction. This is House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries weighed in a statement saying in part, quote, the Trump administration must set forth an ironclad path that dramatically reforms ICE and other DHS agencies that the American people know have become lawless and heavy-handed. It is in the best interest of the country that this is done before the Congress reconvenes on Monday evening and legislation is brought to the House floor. Now, some Republicans have also expressed concerns with recent ICE enforcement. Here's Homeland Security Committee Chair Republican Rand Paul before the vote.
I think with regard to the main issue at hand that sort of led to this, I think the last couple of days have been an improvement. I think rhetoric has been dialed down a little bit in Minnesota. I think Homan's comments about that the agents are expected to behave, they're expected to obey rules, and that maybe we're not going to have agents doing crowd control and have 15 agents in the street. That never made any sense why we were doing that. And so I think Homan's instituted some changes that will bring some calm.
And again, Larry, all eyes on Monday when the House leaders are expected to vote. We understand that vote may happen by Monday at 6:30, but a lot on the table, a lot to sift through, a lot for us to watch. Back to you.
All right, Randy Hildreth, we appreciate you staying here late with us this morning. Thank you so much. Good work today.
Thank you.
Let's go back to the panel, talk about what we have been processing all night long. When we talked with Dr. Gillespie, she was clear that these negotiations really are far from over because individual senators continue to sort of pitch for additional incentives that they want tucked away in this.
And they have the hold power. They, you know, any individual senator can put a hold, as Graham did, right? So, I mean,
temporarily gave us a couple
right?
of
I mean,
there,
these are the difference between the House and Senate, right? So that's how the rules work.
Dominic, you know, I'm curious for you, where do Democrats go from here? It doesn't seem, when you look at it from the outside, that this sort of coalition has sort of rallied around this particular issue. It doesn't look like a unified coalition at this point. What would you say to that?
I don't think that's true at all. I think that you're going to see Democrats be very united on this front, especially going forward over the course of the next 2 weeks as, you know, this stopgap measure is being debated. And, you know, I wouldn't be shocked to see, you know, some kind of partial government shutdown of ICE, you know, after the 2 weeks of this current continuing resolution. I wouldn't be drastically shocked. I really don't think that Democrats will cave on this issue unless they get serious concessions from Trump and the Republicans on Capitol Hill. And, you know, I think that's very up in the air on whether that's going to happen. I think there's some incentives for the Republicans to do that with, you know, polling numbers going drastically out of favor in terms of ICE. But we've also seen that they're kind of unwilling to negotiate. You know, they have the House, they have the Senate, they have the presidency, and so they're like, we're going to do it our way. So,
but they have been at the negotiation table in this case. They have, you know, worked with the president. They have worked with Democrats in order for us to get to this point. So that there has been some sort of compromise.
Absolutely, absolutely. And also, too, they know shutdowns are very unpopular. The one that we had was the longest in history. We cannot have that again. So people need to get back to work, and they need to get back to the work of the American people.
I would say that I would agree if this was a full government shutdown. I think if this was a full government shutdown, that would incentivize Democrats to, you know, get back to, you know, negotiating and maybe have less leverage, right? But, you know, this being a partial shutdown of part of, to your point, part of DHS, I think that makes it very popular move for Democrats to kind of keep going until they get real compromises.
I think we'll see. I think the public is weary. It was weary of these shutdowns, and you know, all the constituents are blowing up these members' phones. This is not what they want.
Right. It does seem though that there does need to be a scapegoat in all of this, right? And Kristi Noem's name keeps floating around there. And I wonder how much longer the White House can hold out.
How long she lasts, we don't know.
Protecting her.
Right. You know, this is always the game of politics. They're always looking for a scapegoat. Sounds like she's the one now, but we'll see. We'll see. We'll see.
Is that sort of person number one in your book?
She does seem like the scapegoat right now, but I will say, this second term of Trump, they've been really hesitant to fully fire anyone. You know, Tim Walz, after the texting scandal or Signalgate, you know, they just demoted him. And so, you know, Pete Hegseth has gone away with a lot of crazy shenanigans that no other DOD secretary would ever get away with. And so I don't know, she might be able to hold out. I'm kind of erring on that side, but I wouldn't be shocked with anything.
I will be, you know, the one thing we've learned about this administration is you don't predict.
100%.
We won't predict. We'll just hope. No matter what happens, you know, hope that we're here to see everything kind of work out the way that it will. To our panelists, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you.
Oh, our pleasure.
Good morning to you as well. We have a weekly half-hour special report dedicated to the impact of the federal workforce and the fallout that it's having on families throughout the country. A new edition of Federal Workforce Fallout streams every Thursday on WSC9 Plus. download it on your TV, and of course, watch it for free. Thank you so much for joining us here for this WC9 special report. The federal government remains right now in a partial government shutdown through the weekend. Our coverage continues on Monday, and we're always on our website on WSA9.com. I'm Larry Miller reporting from Washington. Have a great weekend.